Welcome to the Thank You Life podcast. Today's guest is Sairah Javed. As you'll hear in the episode, this is just another beautiful transformational story of how ketamine-assisted psychotherapy can help somebody who had been dealing with long-standing anxiety and depression. Sairah shares her story of really having these symptoms onset in college and just the spiral of anxiety that was debilitating. She was guided to begin seeing a therapist, even though she was quite resistant at first, as she shares, and she found that she was kind of hitting a wall years later. And she eventually was led to psychedelics, as many of us have who have been dealing with the traditional route of talk therapy, pharmaceuticals, and just kind of going through the standard of care. She did her own research and found that psychedelics could be a really valuable route to pursue. And that eventually led her to Transcend in Austin, which is one of the amazing ketamine therapy clinics in our network. Transcend has a location in Austin and in San Antonio, and we could not recommend them anymore. They're just such a beautiful clinic led by such an amazing team. If you want to learn more about Transcend, and if you are in the Austin or San Antonio areas, you can visit transcendketamine.com. Just another amazing testament to the power of this work, and something that I really appreciated that Sairah was sharing was that if you're in the situation where you've been dealing with these mental health struggles for so many years, you have to come to a choice point where you want to, as she says, hunker down and really commit to the healing work. And she really did it. She took her entire ketamine-assisted psychotherapy process very seriously with the integration. She cut off all media. She wasn't listening to music with words. It was really beautiful to hear how committed she was to her own healing. And the results were astounding for her. She was able to really come to some beautiful resolutions and some healing from early childhood things that really formed some beliefs throughout the rest of her life that were triggered by current events in her life. And after her initial treatment series, where she had such amazing results, life continues to happen and things resurface, and you can kind of go a level deeper with it. So she has been doing maintenance CAP sessions in a group setting. So whether it's one or two other people experiencing it in the room with her, she was able to kind of go back and, as needed, go through this experience again to kind of harvest deeper layers of what needs to be healed. So she shares all of this and walks you through the process of what that was like for her. So just another valuable testament to this type of work and what it really looks like, what it really feels like. It's not easy. It's not a silver bullet. It can show you what's there, but it's still your work that you have to do. And we really appreciate Sairah taking the time to share her story. And again, shout out to Transcend in Austin, transcendketamine.com. We highly recommend just looking into them if you're somebody who has been kind of stuck in your process, and definitely reach out and at least schedule a consultation call with them. Thank you all for listening. We hope you enjoy this episode with Sairah Javed.
Thank You Life is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was started by myself and Dr. Dan Engel in 2022 as a financial assistance fund for psychedelic therapy. Psychedelic therapy is expensive, and 95% of the U.S. population cannot afford its costs. That's where we come in. We partner with over 100 ketamine clinics throughout the U.S. to help clients who cannot afford this treatment. In 2024 alone, we gave over $250,000 away to help 115 people receive this life-changing treatment. This work is not cheap, and it is life-changing. If you feel inspired to give or to become a monthly donor to help more individuals access this treatment, please visit thankyoulife.org/donate or email our Director of Philanthropy, Meredith Thomas, at meredith@thankyoulife.org. Every bit counts, and small monthly donations are especially important to keep this work moving forward. If you can give even $10 to $25 a month, you will join our community of contributors who are changing the lives of so many. Thank you all for your support. This episode of the Thank You Life podcast is proudly supported by Enthea, a mental health company dedicated to providing access to safe and affordable psychedelic-assisted therapy. Like us at Thank You Life, Enthea is committed to removing health equity obstacles that impede access to impactful mental health care. Enthea is a third-party administrator specializing in innovative mental health benefits for employers, including access to ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. As the first and only provider of advanced mental health solutions for the workplace, they enable companies to expand their benefits to include breakthrough therapies that address root causes of mental health challenges. Visit enthea.com to learn more. And now, back to the show. Hi, Sairah.
Hey, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you so much for doing this. And yeah, so we've spoke before in a little practice podcast about your experience, but yeah, here we're doing it as like the real thing.
Real.
And you said you wanted to start at the beginning. I'm sure there's a lot of different beginnings that we could choose from. One place I get curious to start is like, you're talking about this book, The Psychedelic Explorer's Guide, and I'm curious where you were at in life when you started seeking out psychedelic therapy, or when it started coming to you, and just like how all of that went.
It was a really slow development over multiple years. I had reached a point where I was feeling extremely frustrated with medications. I'd already implemented lifestyle changes. I was already doing talk therapy, and I just felt like there was a wall, and I was like, I don't understand why I can't get past this. And I think the first one that I heard about being used for mental health purposes was psilocybin.
Sure.
And so I started researching psilocybin, and found some clinics that I think there were some in Canada. This is like maybe 2016, 17, around there, that time frame. And then of course some like clinics in Europe, and I was reading about people's experience with psilocybin. There are a couple of websites. I don't know if you've heard of like is it Erowid? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
And then of course Reddit, and it sounded really promising. And then I watched a documentary. It was a study that was being done in, I think it was England, and they had done it. It was 4 people, and the documentary was just following them while they were doing these psilocybin sessions. And there was like really promising, positive results. And that's when I started thinking about it. I was like, you know what? I'm willing to try this. If I can bankroll this, I will do it. But at the time, I was like, okay, well, I want to go somewhere where it's going to be safe and that's reputable. And I didn't know of anywhere.
You can kind of be held through it.
Yeah, and I didn't know of anywhere in the States. And I was in Texas at the time. So.
And I mean, if you did know somewhere in the States, it would still have been like an underground situation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so it kind of got pushed aside, and I didn't think about it for a while.
It sounds like you had done everything conventional, so to speak, like meds, therapy, lifestyle changes. That's like the main 3 buckets that are offered besides psychedelics.
Yeah.
So yeah, just interesting to note that like, yeah, you were already very much trying to engage with your own healing, or however you might put that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it was in 2021 where I got, by that time I was divorced. I got divorced in 2020. It was a very painful experience. So still moving through that pain. And then I lost my job in 2021, and I just felt so low. So low.
I'm curious, how old were you at that point?
I'm 36. 31? 4 years. 32. About 32. Yeah. And I met a friend through another friend and found out he was doing something called ketamine. And I was like, what is that? Because he was having a lot of mental health, struggles. And I decided to meet with him and talk to him about it. And he told me, he shared his experience and told me, it's worth checking out. And so I started reaching ketamine, and I found out ketamine had been around for like over a decade at that point. And I was like, what? Why had I never heard of this before? And there are clinics in Houston, so I started researching and looking at like scientific literature, right? Because I was never done a psychedelic before. I felt quite nervous about even, doing it. Even the psilocybin and all that stuff, I felt nervous.
Yeah. Super reasonable.
Yeah. And then some of the research that I was reading, I was like, wow, this like sounds too good to be true. It's just like concrete evidence, you know? And I think the article that did it for me, it was a research that had been done on rats, but I don't remember what type of scan they did, electromagnetic something imaging, I can't remember. And they did it before they administered ketamine to these rats, and then they did it after they administered this ketamine to these rats. And they saw that the ketamine helped regrow dendrites that had atrophied on neurons. I was like, whoa.
Like, talk about concrete.
Talk about, and I was just like, wow, you know, and of course, you know, they had documented like different behavioral changes in the rats too, and
Right.
so, wow, okay. And then I started looking online and trying to find people's actual experiences, like on Reddit and other places, and
Sure.
anywhere that I could, and then just started reading websites of clinics that do ketamine. I was like, you know what? I really want to do this. I really want to do this, but I didn't have the money to do it.
This is still like 2017-ish?
This is actually 2021.
Oh, right. Yes.
Yeah.
After the divorce.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is 2021. So then I gathered all my information and research and decided that I was going to approach my parents about it. My parents are conservative, you know, immigrants to this country. Like, I didn't know how they were going to respond. And at this point, my parents were very aware that I have had these mental health struggles.
And that, yeah, you were trying to work
on them. And every once in a while, they knew that it would like rear its ugly head. And they did their best, but they never really quite got it, you know, understood. And my mom said to me one day, why do you need a therapist? You can talk to me. And I was like, no, I can't. No.
She can be part of your support system.
Yes, she is. And she does her absolute best, and she also has, you know, improved in that area as well.
Yeah, so how do you even think about how you were going to talk about it to them?
I definitely like come at it from a very scientific medical angle. Like, look, this is the research. This is, you know,
especially with ketamine, I wouldn't even use the word psychedelic.
Yeah. So, yeah. And I did I? I think I may have, when I was like some kind of like in the middle of the explanation to my dad, I may have mentioned that it is, you know, what it does. But anyway, so I went home to Houston. And I remember my dad was sitting in his office, and I went in there and I said, hey, Dad, I want to talk to you about something. And I was like, okay. And then I started telling him, I was like, I found this treatment that's very promising and I really want to try it. And I was like, this is why it's promising. And I shared the research and everything else. And his response was, okay. I was like, what? Who are you? I was like, okay, if you think that this will help you, then let's do it. And why
do you think that worked?
I think my dad, he knew how much I was hurting from the divorce. And he saw how much, like, me losing my job, how that impacted me.
Yeah.
Because when I lost my job, I didn't realize how attached I was to it, and it's how I was defining myself for a really long time.
Sure, I can relate with that.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, especially in the 20s, 30s, 40s. It's like kind of the main thing that we're up to. Yeah.
And actually, after I got let go, I decided I was not going to define myself by my career anymore. Like, this is it. And it gave me the awareness that I wasn't even doing that. So I didn't realize I was doing it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think he just saw how much pain I was in, and he knew that I had been struggling with these things for such a long time. And I think he saw that I did my research.
I was going to say, I
Yeah.
imagine that was like,
So
yeah, I love those two pieces that like he was aware that you were hurting and really looking for something, and that he saw that, yeah, you weren't just kind of messing around or just pulling random things out of the air, that you were like really looking into it.
It's really thinking about it a lot. And
but still surprising for you to get that response from him.
Yes. Yeah. Just because, he's a traditional conservative South Asian man,
Totally.
So that's how that started. The ketamine.
So you did a treatment that they sponsored at Transcend.
Mm-hmm.
Still 2021, or like?
Yes, I started in 2021. I think I had started it was either November or December. And then my last treatment ended up being, I believe it was January of the following year, 2022. Cool.
And so shout out to Transcend.
Shout out to Transcend. They're amazing.
Yeah. One of the main clinics here in Austin that we partner with Thank You Life. Mm. And Will Ratliff is one of the owners there, and he's really amazing. And
he really is.
Nurse practitioner there.
Yes, he is.
So, yeah, you were able to jump into that, and it really worked for you.
It did.
Yeah.
It was life-changing. I cannot say enough positive things about it, and about the clinic, and about the practitioners there. I will forever be grateful, because I really do. I have my life is totally different. I have a new lease on life. I felt like they gave me the opportunity to start afresh, to start new. And
so what kind of things were you struggling with from the divorce and the job?
Yeah. So the divorce, all of these things can definitely be tied to the stuff that happened when I was a child. Childhood trauma.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you want me to go back there. I don't mind going back there. Okay.
Please.
So like a child of immigrant parents. We had a big family. There were 6 kids. There was 8 of us total. I am the youngest.
Wow.
And there was a lot of chaos in the house. My parents did their absolute best. I see that now, the healing that I have accomplished, and where I am now, I see that they did their absolute best.
Yeah.
But growing up, of course, it's a different story. There was, emotional neglect. There was some verbal, abuse. There was a lot of tension in the house at times. And that had a big impact on me. And some of the big things some of the negative beliefs that I developed from my childhood were, I'm not lovable. I'm shameful. Yeah, I'm a bad person, right? I'm not enough. I'm too much at the same time. That's always great when you're not enough and too much at the same time. And so, all of those things come into play, as you're moving through life. You carry those things with you into adulthood. If you never become aware of them, you never work on them, you never heal them. And so I had been trying to, over the years, with my therapist, of course, with the medications, helped for a little bit.
Yeah.
Lifestyle changes,
And then for you, was it more like in like the depressive side or the more anxious side?
Both. So it started out as anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And when the anxiety got really bad, it turned into depression. And
makes sense.
I would say as a kid, I was always anxious. And the first time that I felt depressed as a child. I think I was in grade school. I mean, I was in elementary school. It could have been like 4th or 5th grade, but I remember just feeling really sad all the time. And I didn't know why. And I remember thinking like noticing that I wasn't doing, like I didn't want to go out and play. I was very like artistic when I was growing up. I didn't want to do any of my crafty artwork. I just didn't want to do anything. And I just felt sad all the time. And I used to, I remember I would like, while everyone else was playing, like my siblings or my cousins, I would just kind of like go sit by myself. I just felt like I wanted to be alone. And one day my mom came in to talk to me into my bedroom. And she said, "Hey, I noticed that you've been, like, you just seem down all the time." And I told her, I was like, "I don't know, I'm just sad all the time. I don't know why." You know? And then my mom did her best in that moment, but didn't quite know, didn't quite say, I guess, the best thing or the most helpful thing, I'll say. And she was just like, "Oh, don't feel sad." And she started to feel sad.
Sure.
She started to get emotional. And when I saw her feel sad, I felt like I did something wrong. Like I was bad. And I was like, "Oh my God, I need to stop being sad because it's hurting my mom."
Yeah.
And I remember after that conversation, faking it and just like shoving, like I was like, I'd feel sad, but I would just pretend like I wasn't. And at some point, I don't know how long now, it's been too long. I don't know when it stopped, and it kind of stopped. But I was kind of an anxious kid always,
So that point in time, like the sadness just kind of, at some point,
I remember
it just stopped.
It stopped, or maybe I developed a new baseline. I'm not quite sure. A lower baseline maybe.
But some like kind of crucial like maladaptive learning in that through that of like, oh, this is something to hide.
Yes.
And this is also something that like will hurt others, so I should hide it. So
put a mask on.
Yeah.
I got really good at that. As an adult, early adulthood, I got really good at masking. And it wasn't until college, I moved away for college, and the anxiety started to intensify. I remember I was sitting in my apartment, my bedroom, and I was watching a documentary on Discovery Channel about Nostradamus' predictions about the end of days. And I started getting really anxious about it.
Oh no.
I was like, "Oh my God, we're all doomed." I remember having a moment and sitting on my bed and feeling really stressed out and anxious. And I think I tried to call home. And I remember that first semester, and I went to LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. That first semester, I was going home almost every single weekend because
you grew up here in Texas.
I grew up in Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Okay.
Yeah. Small southern town.
So yeah, how far is that from Baton Rouge?
It's 2 hours.
Got it.
Yeah. It's 2 hours 2 hours west of Baton Rouge.
Got it.
Yeah. And so every weekend I was going home because, I didn't have a lot of friends too that first semester, and that anxiety, and I felt lonely and sad. And so I was going home a lot. And the anxiety never got better. And I wasn't aware of it. I don't think the word anxiety wasn't even in my vocabulary.
Sure.
And as like I started to do kind of poorly in school, and once I started doing poorly, I'll also say I had a very painful experience in college. I was fell in love with someone. It was horrible. It turned out horrible. And I kind of feel like that was like a really huge trigger. it triggered a lot of things from my childhood at the time that I wasn't even aware of, right? But then it created new pain. It created new traumas. And so that kind of made me spiral. So I started to do poorly in school because I was so consumed by the pain that I felt. And then once I started to get over that pain, or at least move forward and past it, I was like, oh gosh, I'm doing poorly in school. And then, I started to feel really anxious and stressed, and then I wasn't sleeping well. And then, you can't concentrate when you can't sleep well, and then your memory is poor, and that spiraled. And before I knew it, I had a full-blown generalized anxiety disorder. It was totally out of control. Totally out of control.
You're listening to the Thank You Life podcast because you're interested in hearing inspiring stories about people's personal growth, transformation, and healing with psychedelics. And that's awesome because those stories are really powerful and they deserve to be heard. But if you are anything like me, you are also interested in what's happening out in the world to make these substances, these medicines, more accessible and available to everyone. So my name is Henry Winslow, and I created a free email newsletter called Tricycle Day that helps you do just that. Every week, I send 2 issues that take about 5 minutes to read, so not a huge time commitment at all, but they'll get you caught up on what's happening in psychedelic research, policy reform, and this emerging industry that's unfolding in real time. So if that sounds like something you would like to check out, just go to tricycleday.com, and there you can enter your email and you'll be good to go. So with that said, I'm super happy to be supporting Thank You Life, and let's get back to the podcast.
The podcast is proudly supported by Dr. Bronner's, a brand that believes in more than just making great soap. As a dedicated corporate sponsor of Thank You Life, Dr. Bronner's is helping us break down barriers to mental health care, advancing our mission to providing life-changing access to psychedelic therapy for those in need. Together, we're making healing possible for underserved communities across the country. So next time you see that iconic bottle on the shelf, know that Dr. Bronner's isn't just providing that refreshing shower. They're also invested in improving access to mental health care for everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bronner's, for being a true partner in healing. Visit drbronner's.com to learn more. Now back to the show.
And I was sitting in one of my classes. This was my senior year of college. Sitting in one of my classes and listening to the lecture. And I remember my leg was like bouncing like crazy. Like that was something I used to do a lot, and I couldn't, and feeling really intensely anxious, not even being able to concentrate on what the person was saying. And I mean, there were even moments where the professor would have something written on the board, right? And I'm reading the sentence over and over and over again, and I have no idea what it meant.
Yeah.
That's how intense the anxiety was.
Yeah.
And then I thought I was going crazy.
I
was like, oh my God, I can't understand human language anymore. What's going on?
Yeah, and we when we're in that kind of hyper aroused state, that fight flight sort of state, we shut down the cortex because we're in a state of immediate survival. Let's fight through the stressor or run away from the stressor. And then we can, relax and bring our cortex back on and keep learning or do whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, then if we're chronically in that state and don't know how to let ourselves know that we're safe.
Yeah.
Then just all the systems are so maxed out. And so, yeah, it's hard.
It's very hard. I don't know if you've ever experienced anxiety in your life. Intense. Yeah. It's rough.
It is.
And so in that particular class, where I was I remember bouncing my leg, after it was over, I went to my professor's office to talk to him about working in his lab. And he started asking me questions I know. First he was like, I noticed in class you seemed anxious, and I was like, anxious? What does that mean? I don't know what that means. And I was like, well, I guess that's stressed. and then he started talking to me about his struggles with anxiety.
Oh, wow.
And told me a little bit of his story, and I started to open up a little bit and share. At the time, I didn't have the vocabulary that I do now, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, like I guess like I get stressed out and I worry a lot, and he was like, yeah, I could tell, like in class,
Yeah.
It's like, oh wow, and it kind of just like, whoa, like I remember thinking, why does he care?
Mm.
And I'm surprised that he cared. And he encouraged me to go talk to a counselor on campus. And I was like, okay, I guess, I could talk to somebody. And I remember I left his office, and he was like, okay, well, don't forget to contact the counseling services, I was like, I won't, left, and I'm like, psh, I'm fine. I don't need to contact a counselor. I don't know what he's talking about. And so it was the next day. I had gotten back to my apartment from class. I had just parked my car. I was walking to my apartment, and I get a text message. And I had like one of those old it was like an old flip phone.
Yeah.
Flip phone, yeah. And I opened it, and it was from him. And he said, did you call yet? And in that moment, I paused, and I was like, wow, he really did care.
Mm.
It was such a small gesture,
Totally.
but it had a huge impact on me.
Yeah.
And so I ended up contacting counseling services, and I scheduled an appointment. And
Seems like even now it like has a little bit of an impact on you.
It does.
When you share about it.
Yeah, it does. I still think about him from time to time, and I told him afterwards. I thanked him, like maybe a couple years later. I thanked him for that because it had a huge influence on me.
Yeah, in some ways it seems like it, even if it was very slight at the time, it kind of like puts you in this other kind of direction.
Yeah, it totally did. It really is. And so, yeah, it just makes me think about how, like, how we interact with people day to day, and sometimes something really small can be so impactful for someone else, and we don't realize it. And that's why, it's so important to be kind to others.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I love that you let yourself be impacted by it.
Yeah.
And I'm glad he like reached out again, because you didn't let yourself be impacted
Initially,
the first time or two. Yeah.
I think I was just in denial.
Yeah.
Like,
Well,
denial.
Totally.
And then, I reached out to counseling services, and I went to a few sessions there, and they had decided that I needed the big guns, because they're like, we're going to refer you to a psychologist outside of the campus.
Yeah.
And so I started seeing this person outside of campus. But yeah, that was like the start. And I sort of went back and forth, like, I need help. I don't need help. I need help. I don't need help. I'm fine. No, I'm not, And it took some time for me to fully accept that I had a problem, that I really had a problem. And it makes me wonder how many people out there are in that same space. And some people might stay in that space for a really, really long time.
Years.
Yeah. And that's what prevents them from getting help,
Yeah.
So then, I graduate and I get my very first job, and the struggles don't stop. And, I'm still like on and off medication at this point, right? And the medications are awful. I've been on like 10, maybe 11 different medications.
Mostly anxiety meds?
Anti-anxiety meds.
Yeah.
Always some really uncomfortable side effects. And one of the big ones is I felt like they dulled me down.
Sure.
It was like I didn't really feel low, but I also didn't really feel high. Like my highs were not very joyous, And And I didn't like that. And
Yeah, that kind of thing should, we talk about this a lot in mental health, should be like an acute way to go about things, like
not long term.
an acute solution, and not long term.
And a lot of these doctors and people in the medical field, that's how they use it, long-term treatment. And people have been on anti-anxiety, antidepressant for like 20 years. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it should be like a 6-month thing and then I think that's where other healing modalities that can actually help someone deal with the root cause of things a bit more can come in.
Yeah. I fully agree. Fully on board with that. Yeah. So,
so you were trying a bunch of different meds. Sounds like still doing therapy throughout a lot of this time.
I was at that time, like right when I'd gotten that job, I'd stopped doing the therapy. The psychologist I went to, he was a nice person, but I didn't feel like I was getting much from it. I remember like in his sessions, he did a lot of listening and asking questions, and that was it. And I didn't realize it, but I needed feedback. I needed more of a sounding board. I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. And so I had stopped that, but still with the medications. And I think it was in 2013, I had started going to the sleep clinic because I was having sleep problems. Well, when you're anxious, of course.
Chronically.
Yeah,
for sure.
Of course you're not going to sleep. And I remember this doctor at this clinic, he prescribed me Ambien and Lunesta. We tried Ambien and Lunesta and Trazodone. I still woke up, and he gave me high doses. And I remember going in there and being like, I still woke up like twice in the middle of the night. And he was like, how? I was like, my brain is so powerful.
Wow.
So anyway, so I went into, this was my last appointment there. I went in and got to the clinic, and the doctor that I was seeing wasn't there, and someone was standing in for him. And I remember feeling so annoyed. I was like, I want my doctor. He knows my issues. And every time I went in there, they had me fill out this questionnaire. It was like a mental health questionnaire, and there was a score at the bottom. You probably know it. There's a name for it.
Might be the PHQ-9.
Maybe.
Yeah. Could also have just been like a mood score kind of thing, but.
Okay. And my score was really poor, and
like worse than normal for you.
Well, it was always not good.
But like, was it worse than it typically was for you?
That particular visit.
Is that why it stood out to you, or?
No, it stands out to me because of what I'm about to share next.
Got it. Yeah.
So this doctor who's standing in comes in. It's this lady. She's nice. And she sits down and she's like, so why are we here today? And I'm like annoyed because I'm like, my other doctor would have known while I was here without having to ask me that. Yeah. And so I'm talking and telling her I'm having sleep problems, blah, blah, blah. And this medicine's not working. And she's looking at that thing I filled out.
Yeah.
And then she goes, it sounds like you're experiencing some feelings of self-hatred. And I was like, who the hell are you, woman?
Excuse me?
I remember I was so taken aback. And I kind of I don't think I really said a whole lot. Then I started saying something else. And she, when the appointment was over, she gave me a business card of a therapist and said, even if you don't come back here, please go see her and just see her at least once. Just once. And I was like, okay, all right, I'll go see her. And then I was leaving that office and I was like, I'm not going to call that woman. I'm fine. And I'm driving home and I stop at a stoplight and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I effing hate myself. I used another word. And I just started bawling, just
Mm.
crying, ugly tears in the middle of traffic, like just uncontrollable. And I got home.
Wait, but you said you used another word?
Oh, I used an expletive. I don't know if you want me to use it on here. Okay.
Well, you said effing, but I thought you might have meant for hatred.
Oh, no.
But yeah.
Are we allowed to use expletives?
You can, yeah.
I can use an expletive.
You can curse in here.
Okay. It's a safe space. Okay, good. Yeah, I said I fucking hate myself. Yeah,
But
I got
a powerful kind of moment of like realization plus kind of the let go catharsis afterwards.
Yeah. So I got home, continued crying, and then I think it was like the follow, because I think I might have been like on a Friday or something, and so like Monday I called that therapist, scheduled an appointment, and she's been my therapist for the past 10 years.
Damn.
Yeah.
Wow.
She's amazing. She's an angel in my life.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's interesting. The first time I saw her, so I cried, of course, while I was talking to her about some things. And I remember leaving thinking, I'm wasting this woman's time. I don't have anything wrong with me. Aww. And I just spent half the session crying. Yeah. There was this huge disconnect with what was happening inside, and then what my mind was trying to,
I think about that idea of worth too, that it's like, oh, I'm not even like worth enough that this person who it's literally their profession to support me through this.
Yeah. And
they're getting paid to support me through this. But you're just wasting our time.
Exactly.
Oof.
Yeah. So that gives you an insight into how poorly I felt about myself.
Sure.
And so yeah, over the years, my therapist, I describe her, she's very skilled at what she does. And I feel like she also she relates a lot to what I experienced growing up and some of the dynamics I had in my family, because she had similar ones. And I think that's one of the reasons why she was able to help me so much.
Yeah.
But she saw in the beginning that something I was severely lacking was just plain old validation.
Sure.
Validation of my experience. Something I just did not receive growing up.
Yeah, it reminds me of what you were saying about the neglect.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's interesting. I relate it to something I'm going through, and I've been using the word neglect, but it was about an experience I had as an infant that it was definitely neglect, but also like my parents didn't even know about it. They didn't like know that what I was experiencing was terror.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, one of the key pieces of it was the lack of validation, because they just didn't know it was happening.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think validation for an infant also looks different because there's no language or whatever.
Right.
But that was definitely, as I'm kind of going through my healing process with it, part of it was, there was something about feeling lonely as a child that I didn't even fully, it's not like I was always in that state, and I didn't fully even know that was happening to me. Mm-hmm. But all of that was around the fact that everybody was just acting like that didn't happen to me. Nobody knew that had happened to me. And so there's just this utter missing, like, lack of validation. And it's like, yeah, like, of course they weren't able to validate that or even know that it had happened. But anyway, just to say, like, I really can connect all of that. And it makes me almost want to define neglect, at least a piece of it, as just like fundamentally a lack of validation. There's this, gosh, I'm forgetting her name, but I've been listening to this psychologist from New York, and I forget what her podcast is called, but she was on the Huberman Lab recently.
Okay.
And she talks about kids having these like kind of two fundamental questions. And one of them is, am I real? And that just speaks to the like validation, and that like, if we're not validating their experience as being real,
Yeah.
valid, then all kinds of things can happen to us from that.
Wow. Am I real? Yeah.
So anyway, for you, she was finally just like, it sounds like just one of the first people really to validate.
To tell me I'm real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the things
Yeah.
that you're experiencing
They're
are
real.
fucking real.
Yeah. And so she did that for a long time. Like I noticed, like, when I look back on our sessions, she spent a lot of time just validating what I was going through. She recognized that that's what I really, really needed.
Yeah.
You know, and she's not the type of person. She doesn't tell you what to do, tell you how you need to be living your life, right? She's a mirror. She's a really, really good mirror. So yeah, she's fantastic. So I spent, a lot of time having sessions with her, and in the beginning, I remember thinking that therapy had to be like all or nothing. Like I had to go to therapy or not go to therapy. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I didn't realize like it's totally okay to have like multiple sessions in a month and then maybe go 2 months without talking to her. Like that's fine, And I think I'm not the only person that has that, looks at it that way. They don't realize like
the very like kind of black and white thinking with it.
Yeah.
Like I either need to quit
Yeah.
or go weekly or
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's
Just
not
let
at
it be
all.
more fluid.
Because I actually stopped talking to her for a couple of years.
I think that can be super empowering in itself.
Yeah. Because I remember being really mindful too, while I was seeing her. I was like, I don't want her to become my crutch, right?
Totally.
This is like, she is helping me, but she's helping me learn how to support myself, but just like live my life. Like she cannot be my sole person that I go to for this validation and everything. And she's helping me learn how to lay my boundaries out and communicate with the people that I care about, so that, we can just have I can have like a healthier little community in general around me. So,
reminds me of like breaking your leg. It's like, okay, you need crutches. Ultimately, you also need PT. But yeah, like and I think the therapist can be that crutch at first to like, help us hobble around when we have a broken leg.
Yeah.
But then, also they need to play that PT role to like, so we are strengthening our own legs so we can walk on our own 2 feet.
Right. Yeah. So I think while I was married is when I kind of stopped seeing her as much or talking to her as much. Like there were a couple of years in that marriage, and then when things started to go south, is when I reached back out to her. I was like, I really need some support. And so even like all those years, so from 2011 to 2021, so that's 10 years. Yeah. So I was on and off medication, right? Trying to find the one that helped me best. And so it wasn't until I did the ketamine treatment that I finally was able to wean off of medication for good. So, and I no longer take anything.
How's that feel?
Amazing.
I bet.
Amazing. Yeah, I feel like a normal human being now. Before I just didn't feel like I could function well without assistance of that kind. Yeah. So,
which is like, stuff still happens to you, but just that wording too, like I feel like a normal human being that doesn't need like outside assistance to function.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's still so many people that are in that space.
Yeah. Like you mean needing the assistance, like that?
Yeah, and not feeling normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm like, I think I'm a weirdo, but
That's its own issue.
This is a separate issue.
Now you're a weirdo without anxiety.
Yes. But yeah, it's just having spent so much time, and even in that 10-year span, there were still moments where I would kind of deny what was happening in the struggle, right? And then there were times where like life just sort of carried me away from myself. Right? I just got really wrapped up in what was happening in my life with certain life events. So I might go a period of time where I'm like not doing a lot of self-reflecting. And then, when things got really bad, I'd be like, okay, well, let's reach out to a therapist, or let's try and see what I can do to try and help, with the anxiety and whatever else I'm going through right now. And it was always a big struggle. And as I started learning about psychedelic therapy, that's kind of when I started really thinking like, okay, like this is, if you want to change your life, if you don't want to have these struggles for the rest of your life and you want to be happy, then we might need to really hunker down at some point. And my ketamine treatment in 2021, that was my hunkering down. Mm-hmm. That was we're doing this. Everything else in life can just fall by the wayside. This is the most important thing right now, because if we can't heal, if we can't find something to help ourselves, I was just like, I just didn't want to live my life, my whole life, struggling with this stuff, So
you had all this kind of this like acute stuff come up in college. Mm-hmm. Then for the next 10 years, it's like a combination of, meeting that therapist who was super helpful, then also getting married. And then it was like the divorce and losing your job. So it was like, it sounds like therapy was working pretty well, even though you were still trying different meds. You were still going through somewhat of a healing process, but then those two kind of big life events brought the mental health stuff to the fore in a...
I would say they just felt like this cherry on top. It was like, here you go. Here's this mountain of shit. Here's the cherry.
And it led you to kind of what you were describing before, I think at some point, of like, okay, all these things did something, but like it's not enough. All these kind of conventional things that I've done.
It just wasn't enough to take me to the next step. Yeah. I always used to feel like, so my therapist and I would talk about these concepts and things in their sessions, and I would journal about them and, and try and be mindful and practice, and just felt like there was a wall. I was like, why won't my mind grasp this? That's what it felt like. And I do believe, years of being on overdrive, years of having this anxiety disorder and then going to depression, parts of my brain, I think, just shut off. I don't know. I mean, maybe you can tell me more about that, but like...
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. And like, I just think of the chronic piece of it. And then, you were talking about all those beliefs from earlier of like, I mean, it sounds like the worthlessness might just capture a lot of that. So, to me, that like 0 to 7 time period, 0 to 5, it all is just so magnified. And to me is like I think we're so plastic when we're born that, you look around the world, we can really program kids into anything. We can program them into any language, any culture. Yeah. We can program them to love themselves or any of the abuses that happen to them. They're so fluid in that way. And so whatever happens to you in those early time periods is like the kind of base programming. And then it's often very unconscious.
Yeah.
And then, in therapy, we talk a lot about bottom up and top down, and I think they're both really useful. Top down might be something like an affirmation or like CBT.
Okay.
To be like, I am lovable. But if like all of your core programming and really poignant experiences that are unconscious now are locked inside saying I'm not lovable, to like every so often be like, I'm going to think I am lovable. Like it, if that was like on a scale, it doesn't balance it out. Yeah. And that's where this idea of emotionally corrective experiences come in. So much of what we're trying to provide in therapy is an emotionally corrective experience that can actually start to balance out the other way of like, oh wow, I just had this really full experience of like, I am lovable.
Yeah.
I just told my therapist some shit, and like I felt so just held in it, and like they didn't bat an eye at it, and just really were there and loved me as I shared that. And that starts to balance out
I got you,
the scale some. And so I feel like it's I don't totally know the kind of neurological technicalities of this, but I feel like on one hand it's like erasing the old, not necessarily erasing the memory, but like erasing the impact of the memory, so to speak.
I gotcha.
Like in EMDR specifically, a trauma healing modality, they'll talk about really kind of working with a particular memory until it's neutral. So we start working with some traumatic memory and we're like 10 out of 10 triggered by it. And we'll keep working with it until we're like neutral about it. That's just like sort of one example. And so, if there's this body of memories that really has this I'm worthless embedded in it, like working with that until that belief is more neutralized. And then also building out new experiences of the opposite. Oh, I do have worth. And it's really concrete with this experience or this relationship. So I think both are really sort of necessary. But point in all of that too is like, I think there's a limit to what we can get in an hour sober with a therapist. And that's where psychedelics can provide really strong, because of the non-ordinary state experience about it. And I think on one hand, it can allow for really visceral re-experiencing of old things, which can sometimes be re-traumatizing, which is part of the inherent risks with psychedelics, especially if it's not done in a safe place, that can turn into like a bad trip. But done in, with a really skilled practitioner, the idea is to re-experience something, but then get the emotionally corrective experience where like, oh, I'm experiencing this pain from childhood, but back then I was alone in it. And going through this neglect, not feeling seen, not feeling validated. Now I get to re-experience it. And again, this is where therapy is great, but the re-experiencing it in a 1 hour sober therapy session might be a 1 out of 10 or a 3 out of 10. With psychedelics, it can be like a 9 out of 10. And then you still get that validation from the therapist. And that can end up just being a really potent kind of tipping of the scales. So, I forget exactly where we were, but you started doing the ketamine.
I think, I was talking about how it just kind of hit a point where it was like, because I had said I felt like there was a wall.
Right?
And I think in my research, I remember seeing something that said like basically like that kind of chronic stress of anxiety and depression can make neurons atrophy. And so if certain neurons or certain pathways are no longer lighting up, you know, that's an issue. And so that's why when I read that rat article, I was like, oh wow, okay, maybe this will help me bring my brain back online. I should probably like look that back up and see, to just refresh my memory, so I'm not like saying something wrong. So like, don't take my word for everything, or don't take it for. Anyway, moving on. So yeah, that's when I decided I was gonna just, you know, I was like, okay, I don't have a job now. My dad, thankfully, so appreciative of my dad, was gonna help me out and pay for these treatments. And yeah, the treatments themselves, I mean, you know, it's not for the faint of heart. It's a lot of, takes a lot of courage, takes a lot of effort. And I honestly believe that the most important part of doing, you know, the ketamine was afterwards, the integration, you know, like, yes, it's very important, but also that work afterwards. During that treatment, that first treatment starting in 2021, I stopped consuming media. I stopped reading. I stopped watching TV. I stopped listening to music that had words in it. I was trying to sort of detox my brain.
Yeah,
right?
wow. Good for you.
Yeah, and I didn't for the entire time. And I would say total, it probably took me, I think it was like 3 or 4 months total. I didn't consume anything.
Wow.
The only thing that I was listening to was like some solfeggio frequencies.
Sure.
Yeah. And that is it. And I'm really glad that I did that. I feel like for me, that's what I needed. Maybe not everybody needs that, but I felt like I had needed that detox and to be away. So I also started journaling, and I just did like stream of consciousness journaling. That's how I started. And I remember like Transcend, I'm assuming they still have this, but they also have like a coaching sessions that they do. I don't know if they still have the coaching. I don't know. Do you know? Do they?
I'm not sure.
Okay. But I got like, I think it was 2 or 3 like free sessions. And the coach's name was Jules. I don't remember her last name, but she was lovely. And she was like, you know, why don't you try journaling? And I was like, yeah, I've tried journaling before. Not really. She was like, well, you know, there's no like, she's like, well, how do you, like, what do you do? You know? And I think I shared with her, like, you know, I don't know. I always feel like I have to do it every day. And if I don't, like, for some reason, I had all these rules in my head about journaling. I don't know where that came from. And she was like, and apparently she was like, you know, a lot of people look at it that way. And she's just like, I don't understand why people do that. But she was like, try just stream of consciousness journaling. You don't have to start out with dear diary or dear journal or whatever. Just start writing.
Today I ate breakfast and then...
Yeah. It's not about that, you know? It's like just write whatever comes to your mind. So that's what I started doing, and that kind of shifted my perspective on how I look at it, and I found it very helpful. And then she also recommended to me doing mirror work.
Nice.
And that was so uncomfortable at first, to look at yourself in the mirror and say things to yourself. The first time I did it, I cried. Actually, the first multiple times I cried. You know, it took a while for me to get used to it. I did that for 6 months straight, every day. Did not let myself not do it.
The journaling and the mirror work.
The journaling and the mirror work.
Wow.
Yeah, didn't let myself not do it. Also during that time, I was meditating. And me, so like, you know, in therapy at Transcend, we talked a lot about self-compassion. And I'm like, okay, well, what does that look like? I don't know what that looks like. Being nice to myself. I don't know. I needed something concrete that I could follow, a practice. I needed a practice. That's what it was. So I found this book. Can I plug this?
Please.
Okay, I'm plugging it. It's called The Mindful Self-Compassion Workbook. It's by Dr. Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer. She's actually a professor at UT here in Austin.
Oh, cool.
And this book, it has a lot of exercises in it where you actually like write things. And so what I would do is every single day, I also created in my room a comfortable meditation corner. Somewhere where I could go sit to meditate, but also like if I was feeling low or just wanted comfort, I would go sit there. And so I would every evening, first what I would do is I would draw a bath, meditate in the bath. Actually, I would listen to a guided meditation by Kristen, Dr. Neff. And then I would sit in my meditation corner and I would read this for at least 10 to 15 minutes and work through some of the prompts and everything.
Yeah.
And so I was doing all these things.
Yeah.
So
you really took your integration super seriously.
Very seriously. I was
Good for you.
determined. So determined.
Good for you.
And it was a struggle. I had highs, I had lows, but I didn't stop. I made sure that I stuck to it.
Gosh, it feels like that is just like the key to anything, is that sort of persistence, learning something new, having a particular desire and career that you're going after, all the self-healing work. Good for you.
Thanks. It took a lot of energy and effort to move through that. And one thing that I reminded myself too during the treatment was trust the process. Even on days where because there was one of my treatments was really rough, and I almost felt like I felt worse afterwards. And I remember talking to the therapist at Transcend and telling them, and they're like, this is just part of it.
Yeah.
This is just like, that is something that can happen. It doesn't mean that you are getting worse. It's just part of it. And so I was like, okay, basically I just need to trust this process. And I did. And sure enough, I just felt like with each successive month, I felt better and better and better and better. And then before I knew it, I turned around and I was like, whoa, look how far I've come,
Yeah. So what was happening in the sessions that were potent for you?
Okay. So the first round in 2021, I remember it being really hard to surrender to those experiences. And I remember the therapist telling me how important it was to work on just letting go during the session and letting the ketamine bring up what it needs to bring up, right?
Yeah.
I think the big things that we talked about, the intention setting that I had at that time was, I'm not shameful. I'm not too much. I'm lovable,
So
all those
really,
beliefs that
going toward those beliefs.
Yeah, the things from childhood. Right?
Yeah. So how did all that manifest for you? Did memories emerge, or
it wasn't memories?
Mm-hmm.
It was a lot of just emotions, maybe associated with old things.
Yeah.
And I can't remember them now, but I know during the sessions there were a few epiphanies.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like for me, most of the epiphanies came afterwards, when I was doing my integration work, when I was doing my meditations and stuff. And so in the sessions themselves, I remember I had a lot of visuals, right? And it wasn't visuals of memories. It was just like shapes and colors, because they played the music while this is happening, and so the music did influence what I saw. It was just a lot of emotion, and it might be
like old emotion from back then.
Old emotion, like feeling sad. I think quite often in the sessions I felt sad. Sad for the little Sairah.
Yeah.
Just feeling for her, letting myself feel for her in those sessions. The struggles, the pain that she felt. And even because there were some things that I used to feel a lot of like guilt and shame around stuff, and forgiving myself in those sessions. And now that I'm talking about it, I feel like a lot of those sessions it was really me working, like practicing self-compassion in those sessions. I think that's what.
Yeah, and the way you describe it really reminds me of IFS and like
IFS, what's that?
Internal family systems. It's a type of parts work.
Okay.
And I think a lot of the idea with it, how it relates to what you're talking about, is to be able to get into what they call self energy. And they have these 8 C's that we can identify to help us get close to this sort of self energy. And the primary 2 that I often work with are like with clients is compassion and curiosity.
Okay.
Others are connectedness, courage, and I guess four others.
Okay.
But the idea in IFS is to ask this question: how do I feel toward this part? And then, if it's somewhere in the range of being curious or compassionate towards it, we're on the right track. If it's something like frustrated or scared, like I'm very scared of this part, or I'm frustrated that this part's coming up again because I don't know what to do, I don't know how to handle this part, then, we kind of keep working with it. But yeah, the idea is to get to this self energy where we're feeling compassionate toward this part or curious about it. And yeah, when I hear you talk about, feeling sad and basically feeling her feelings, it sounds like, because another way to describe that self energy is like being in our adult, and it very much sounds like you were. We also use the term reparenting.
Yes.
And so, if I was to guess, I think the general thing would be like, back then Sairah was alone in those feelings, but now in the ketamine you were with her, and so adult Sairah was reparenting her. Instead of the neglect, it was, I'm here feeling with you.
Yeah, I'm getting a little bit emotional because you just reminded me of I think it was my very last session in the beginning of 2022, where for the first time I did have a visual of like actual people. It was kind of like silhouette, right? And it was a silhouette, and I understood it to be me holding the hand of my younger self and like walking her somewhere.
That's it right there.
And I remember when it was happening, Anna, the therapist, I had said something, and she had asked me a question, like, well, what are you doing with her, with the little Sairah? Like, we're just walking together, we're holding hands. And
it's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, some emotions come, huh?
Yeah.
You're really feeling that. You ever watch was it Wreck-It Ralph?
No.
Is that the name of the movie?
That is the name of a movie.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. So you have not seen that?
Yeah.
It's so random, but it's a cool visualization. So anyway, it's all about these like arcade games, and there's this one racing arcade game, and basically there was this one character who used to be in the arcade game. So if you're a little kid and you go play that game, you can like pick all your characters, and she was one of them. But then the other characters like banned her from the game, and they showed that visually, and basically like there's like a bunch of like nodes and like connection points like all here, and it was all the characters and all of the other programming that ran the game.
Okay.
And they like brought her out, and she was like way separate and over here. And it's how I visualize what's happening in the brain with these parts of us. And that like when that part of you isn't able to connect to your adult, it's literally over here by itself, and there's no neuronal connections that are able to access adult Sairah, so to speak, able to access the cortex, which is like what helps us tell ourselves that we're safe. And it's the part of the brain that doesn't fully form till we're 25. So in some ways I would say that our grounded, regulated adult self is really, or that self energy from IFS is really contained in the cortex. It's our, or another way to say it, it's our ability to really maintain our cortex being online. And that's the part of us that gets to say to ourselves, I'm safe. Physically, I'm safe because I'm, in these different constructs. I'm in the United States, and we're in this building right now, and I don't think you're going to attack me, and so I feel
You don't
safe.
know that.
I still feel
You don't
safe.
know me.
But that's all of our cortex that's like doing that work. And so if our limbic system, which is a bit more where like the fight flight is contained, rears its head up and starts getting nervous, it's our cortex that'll be like, oh, like, I'm actually in this room and everything's chill right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, to go back, like, I think what often happens with these parts of us, like, I think ideally when we're a kid, there's an adult who does have their cortex online, who's able to meet us. And when those things happen, the brain forms in a way where like all of it's getting integrated, and that sad part has access to a cortex, even though it's kind of like on the outside. But then somehow the way the brain builds, it ends up having access to my own cortex. But then, yeah, if that doesn't happen and there's neglect, then yeah, it's just, some part of Sairah did continue to evolve and become an adult, but that part just was never integrated into it. And so when you would go into that part, it would almost be like a kind of break, which would also kind of explain the like getting into a fight flight. And it might not have been that part, it could have been another younger part of you, but when all that anxiety came up, that you weren't able to help yourself feel safe or think very clearly.
Right.
Because you went into a part that's like perhaps literally, although we don't have like the neuroscience to necessarily show it, or I don't have that it's like quite literally cut off from those other parts of the brain. So I don't know, that's just how I think about a lot of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you had mentioned that. What was it called? Integrative
IFS?
IFS.
Internal Family Systems.
Family
Yeah.
Systems.
So it
I
was.
mentioned that before.
Yeah, it was created by this guy who was doing family systems work, and then kind of spontaneously working with some women with bulimia. This inner parts work started, but he noticed that all of their parts really reflected like a family system, and there were different parts that played different roles just like a family system, and it all kind of was created through that.
Interesting.
Beautiful, amazing work, all that stuff. But anyway, yes.
You just reminded me too of another research article I had read years ago about ketamine being used to cure bulimia. So
Oh, wow.
Anyway, random. Not really random, but yeah.
So yeah, we were talking about
Self-compassion.
Yeah,
And the
this
sessions, yeah.
that vision of you holding
Yeah.
the hand of your younger self.
Yeah.
Those are my favorite moments in
Yeah.
therapy. They're they're so precious.
Feels like a breakthrough, right?
Yeah.
It's like, whoa. It's a big deal. Really big deal. Yeah.
So I think there's a couple other things I would like to touch on
Sure.
before we close. And so last time we spoke, you had done all these ketamine that we just talked about, but then you were also about to do some of these group sessions. And yeah, you were sharing earlier that now you've done those. So those were also at Transcend, although almost like half the cost because it was able to be in a group model. Again, something Thank You Life does a lot of to, for multiple reasons. On one hand, to bring the cost down for people, but also on another hand, to bring in this kind of community component that gets to happen. But yeah, I'm curious to hear how those were. And we also would put those in the category of like maintenance. You did your main series and then you come back later. So it sounds like you did those a couple years later, did them this year.
Yes. I started, so it was just 3 of them and they were spaced 4 weeks apart. And I did the first one in June. Yeah, it was at the beginning of June. And then another one at the beginning of July and then one at the end of July. And I felt very nervous going into it because it's just been multiple years. I just didn't know how my body was going to be. And that first experience back was really intense.
So even before we get to that, was there something that made you want to go back and have some more sessions?
Yeah, I just felt like things had felt a bit rough for the previous 6 to 8 months. And it felt like I had some concerns that I may have been backsliding in some ways. And I was like, the therapist always told me hey, anytime you have something that's going on, if you're struggling, don't wait. Please come back, let us help you. And I always knew I no longer have to be on medication, but it's quite possible that I might still need to do maintenance sessions over the rest of my life. And that's fine. That beats being on those medications, I'm able to live my life.
Totally. And if it feels like actual healing's happening and it's something that you just do for 2 hours in a day rather than a med every day to dull yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
To do it that way.
So yeah, I had kind of been struggling. I was feeling really anxious and having a hard time. I just all the tools that I had to manage the anxiety that would come up from time to time. I just felt like it was getting a little bit harder and harder. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna do some maintenance sessions. And they had these group ones, and they were much, they're probably about half the cost. I think it was $350 around there. And it was only it's maximum 3 people in the group. So it's very small. Yeah. And the first time I went, it actually one of the people backed out kind of last minute. So it was just 2 of us. And there's, there's the therapist and then there's 2 nurses in the room, right? So you have 3 for each person that would be there. You have at least 1 person to help. And so, it was really intense. I felt very scared, nervous going in. And, the months that I told you I was struggling, I was really stressing out about work, about life and taking care of myself. I had a moment one day where I was like, okay, I'm single. Holy crap. I could be single for the rest of my life. I don't know what's going to happen in life. It could just be me. I really need to make sure that I'm able to take care of myself. And I know I have family and I have friends, but I remember thinking ultimately it's on me, And so I was putting a lot of pressure on myself.
Yeah.
I didn't realize it at the time, but I was. And so that first session, again, I was feeling really scared, and I was like, okay, I can always ask for a handhold at any moment in time. And so they started the drip, and I started to feel the effects of it. And always, every single session, I get a little bit emotional when I first start to feel it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, I feel very vulnerable. It's like, oh gosh, I'm going into this thing. I'm going into this ketaverse, like, alone. I don't know what's going to be there. And
I feel like that's what being born is like.
yeah.
It's like, all right, I'm going back in alone. I mean, born into parents, but still like,
yeah.
Like, all right, here
You're
we go.
coming out into this world, and you don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. Yeah, I started to feel scared, and I remember thinking, okay, I think I'm okay. And then at one point I was like, no, I need help. And so I asked for a handhold, and Will held my hand for the rest of the time. And I was so grateful. I really needed it. And immediately when he held my hand, this like wave of emotion and this understanding and this knowing of there's always support for you, Sairah. Always support. And that ended up being the theme for basically that whole session. And in that session, that's when I realized I was being really hard on myself and putting a lot of pressure on myself. And that I am not alone in this world. I have support, and it's okay to want support from family, from friends. It's okay to want a partner to support you. Like, I think I fall into this trap very easily of being too independent because it's sort of one of the coping mechanisms I developed as a kid.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't have the support, so I have to do things on my own.
Yeah.
So that ended up being like the really big theme during the session. And so it's funny because I started out crying, and then at the end of the session I was smiling, like when I was coming back to the room. And it ended up being a really profound experience. And I did a lot of contemplating after that. And I did a decently long journal entry about it afterwards. And I was like, okay, the big things that came out of that one was, man, ease up on yourself, and it's okay to accept support from people and want it. Let people not only just support you, but let people love you. That also was kind of a thing, like receive that, be open to it.
Yeah.
And then the second session.
So just that right there.
Yeah.
I think that's a great example of what I was talking about with like an emotionally corrective experience, where the old belief is like, there's no support. I need to do it on my own. And then I imagine you can really feel how impactful it was with the ketamine, whereas the same hand holding and the same experience in a 1-hour therapy session, it wouldn't have been the same impact.
Yeah.
It sounds like that was like perhaps even like life changing or like belief altering.
Yeah.
Just to have that one. And I mean, we all need more than one experience like that, but super profound.
It really was. And I remember thinking too, not only is it okay for me to accept this, but I was like, well, I'll use Will in particular. Like, he wanted to, right? And of course he's getting paid, but he does this job because he wants to do it, right? I'm sure it gives them so much meaning. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I'm sure.
No, I can attest to that.
Yeah.
And it feels good to get paid well for our work, but it's so meaningful and beautiful to get to be there for people and know that we're giving them these like emotionally corrective experiences that can really help them ultimately, heal themselves and find that within themselves and change their beliefs.
Yeah.
It's really special to get to be there in those moments for people.
Yeah, it's nice. So yeah, it ended up being a really lovely, profound experience. And then the second one, oh, you know what? Something that I kind of want to go into this a little bit.
Please.
So that first session, I had a thought during the session of, what if I'm dying right now?
Very normal, especially with ketamine.
And it was the first time I had experienced that thought during a session. And then this, of course, in these moments, all of the thoughts, all the feelings, everything comes really quickly, right? Also associated with that thought was, what if there's no one there? What if it's just me alone, floating in a black abyss, and there's no one there to support me? And then immediately after that, the thought came, no, there's support in death too. Because ultimately, I do believe that, right? And it's my own spiritual belief. I do believe that there is.
Yeah.
But I had been carrying this fear. It was a fear.
Totally.
And actually, that fear, I think that fear kind of became instilled in me after after I did psilocybin for the first time.
Alone, you were saying?
I did it alone.
Yeah.
Which was not a good idea. Don't recommend if you've never done it. I think during that experience, I'd sort of developed this fear of death being lonely.
Yeah.
Not knowing, and perhaps if I had had someone there to facilitate and guide me, that would not have happened. So that's why, it's very important not to do these things on your own. After that first one, I journaled about it, of course, and I was sort of like contemplating and basically meditating on the experience. And it occurred to me that I had been fearing death because I was afraid that death was lonelier than life.
Oof.
Yeah, and so it makes sense that anxious statement came up during the session of what if there's no support there, right? And then it was like, no, there's support there. It's just like, so it kind of helped reconfigure that. So now I find I'm not carrying that same fear anymore, right? So it's like the ketamine sort of undid what the psilocybin, unfortunately,
maybe like
implanted in my brain.
Yeah. Have I told you about the book Journey of Souls?
It sounds familiar.
I think part of my goal with this podcast is to tell every guest about Journey of Souls.
I need to write this down.
But yeah, I can tell you about it afterwards. It's one of my favorite ones and really solidifies what I think I've had with my own experiences, especially with psychedelics, but of what happens in between death and rebirth. Yeah, so it's written by this psychologist / hypnotherapist who started doing regression therapy, which is, kind of going into people's childhood memories and things like that they can't really consciously remember. That turned into past life regression stuff. And then he started, so somebody would die in the past life as he's like asking what happens next or whatever. And then he would just stay with their soul. They wouldn't just move on. He would stay with their soul and ask them what happened next. And after like 30 years of this kind of work, he had all these cases that, I'm not surprised, really corroborated with one another about. And then, so the whole book, the first chapter's on death and dying. And the last chapter is like, the last couple of chapters are like choosing a new body and rebirth.
Interesting.
And it's all just everything that happens in between those two, which is very fascinating. But yeah,
Very interesting.
I would say one piece of that is very much that we are supported in death.
Yeah. You know, I met someone a couple of years ago who was very, very interested in near-death experiences.
Sure.
He himself had one. And so he started going to these groups where they would meet up and they would talk about these things. And he shared with me like the themes and how everybody's experience was aligning, and that there was something to, in particular, like past lives, right? And that got me interested, and I went down a rabbit hole of just like researching and looking up stories of people who've remembered past lives, and there are a lot of stories of children remembering things in particular, and like parents actually would investigate what their kids were saying, right? And these kids are like 4, 5, you know, and they would actually find like, oh wow, there was a person named this, lived in this city. He had this sibling with that same name that my child is telling me, and he died in this the same way my child told me. And it's like, holy, what, you know?
It's wild,
It's
isn't it?
wild. And it's like,
Yeah, and I think India and then kind of Beirut, where's Beirut? Lebanon, for some reason is really
hotspot.
Yeah.
I was reading about why.
And there's some guy who's written a few books about and just kind of studied these cases.
Really?
Is that what you're talking about?
It could be this person. Do you remember his name?
I have one of his books, but I'm blanking on his
Okay.
name. Yeah.
Because I remember the question came up of why were these hot spots, and I was like, well, the reasoning was, you know, could be cultural, and the spiritual beliefs that these people hold. They believe in that stuff, therefore they pay attention to it. So here in the United States, if a kid starts talking nonsense about, you know, where's my grandma Susie, and like making up people, we're just like, why is my kid just has a wild imagination, and they don't ask questions, they don't pay attention to it, they just brush it off.
Yeah. Or even actively like suppress it.
Yeah.
Like, no, Santa Claus is cool, but like none of this other stuff that actually might be real.
Yeah.
Don't think about that.
Don't talk about those things. You're gonna creep everybody out.
Yeah.
So it's very fascinating. Very fascinating. I forgot how we got on that topic.
Me too. You're talking about your second journey and just the support.
I had mentioned how like the death thing came up in that first one, and sort of where that came from, and how it was interesting to like to see more into what I was actually believing and what was actually bothering me, and how like ketamine, I guess, kind of like rewrote it. It was like, wait, no, you know.
Yeah.
And then the second session that I had, so again, a month later, that ended up being a lot. I felt a lot of self-love in that session. Like, I don't think I've ever had a ketamine session where I felt that before. Like, this was the first time. And it was like the love, it wasn't just love for self. It was love for everything that could ever possibly exist and that ever was. And I was included in that. And it was like indisputable, irrefutable, like just absolute truth. It was beautiful. It was so beautiful to experience that. And I remember sitting with it in the experience. And my mind in that particular session was really able to calm down and relax a lot more and just sort of enjoy that feeling and be in it. And so every time my mind might like redirect and start thinking about something else, eventually it would always come back to that self-love. So it was like going in this so I started out with self-love, and then I ended with self-love. Like it was just there the entire time. And I remember after when I came out of it, and the therapist is asking me like, what did you feel? How did it go? And I told her, and I was like, and that's it. Like, this is what I felt. Because usually I would have so much, right? It'd be like some fear and some sadness and blah, blah, blah. And it was like, that was just it. And I didn't really have words. No words were coming. It was just sitting with that. So
Amazing.
That was really nice.
I feel like both are so, like all range of experiences with psychedelics are so important. And often so much of our initial work is really in that, like the areas of pain and working on the pain pieces. But my supervisor described this at one point, like there's two kind of main areas of work, and one is like the shadow work, the difficult things, the pain points that are stuck in the system. But then it's not just enough to get rid of those. There also needs to be like an active building out of the positive and of the beautiful. And it sounds like that just got to be such a, like I love to use the word reference point.
Okay.
So yeah, like that experience was such a reference point for you of self-love, and that like you just got to really sit in that for that whole entire thing. And yeah, I'm curious, like, are you able to use that as a reference point for self-love, to re-access self-love through the memory of that experience?
The memory of that experience doesn't activate self-love. I feel like self-love gets activated now, like on its own. But I'm really glad you said that, because I remember at the time thinking like, oh, maybe I wasted a ketamine session because I wasn't like working through
Doing
like
work,
like a sadness and a fear and all this stuff. So I'm really glad that you said that.
Yeah. Yeah, to me, that's when the healing work, not that it ends, but when like a lot of the major stuff starts working itself out, that's the other part, is to go from like baseline into the divine, so to speak, like, and deepen our capacity for these more beautiful experiences, for joy, for love, and these kinds of things. So I think they're also equally as important, and can be a great like okay, cool, like things are shifting here. It doesn't always need to be about diving back into all the pain.
I gotcha. Yeah. I'm gonna keep that. Remember that, so that in the future, if I do go back and have similar. Yeah.
So what about like the last one, and then I'm curious how you kind of landed back in life after these group maintenance sessions that you did.
So the last one, things kind of came full circle in that last one. Support came back up in that one. And what was really interesting about this last session, something came up that I don't think would have come up had I been in an individual session. So I touched something from my childhood in that one. And because there were a couple of times, so the other person that was in the session with me, she just needed a little bit of extra support. And I was able to, at this point, give myself verbal support. I was saying things out loud like, "You're safe, Sairah," and even the therapist was like, "I didn't have to do much for you. You were good." But twice this happened. So we have headphones on in these group sessions, right? Noise canceling headphones where the music is playing, and you have your own individual playlist. And at one point, the song was dying down, and I could hear voices in the room. And I felt a little bit concerned that was going to interfere with my experience negatively. And so I did. I asked. I said, hey, can you turn the volume up on the music? And I don't know if they did, but I'm assuming they did. But then I pretty quickly, I was like, you know what? No, I'm okay. I can support myself here. And, she just, in this moment, the other person just needs support. And it doesn't mean, like, it's not taking any support away from me. I'm supporting myself. We're all supporting each other in this room. And so I was able to move on. And then it happened again, a second time, kind of towards the end of the experience. And there was a brief moment, very brief moment, where I was like, what if they forget about me? And immediately, this understanding, this knowing of, you won't be, you never will be, it's not possible. And immediately I felt all that fear that I had when I was a kid. It was like, oh my God, there was this realization. It was like, oh my God, when I was a kid, I was never going to be forgotten. I was never going to be left behind. I was never going to be abandoned, because that was one of the things that I struggled with as a kid, right?
Yeah.
And it was just this like infallible truth, this just knowing of, holy crap, your whole life, not your whole life, but up until like a huge chunk of your life, you were feeling afraid that you would be discarded and forgotten by your family and the people that care about you. And this entire time, that was never the case. Like, that was never the truth. And it was just, oh man, in that moment, I felt ecstatic, but I was also like teary-eyed. I was like just full of so much joy at this realization, and this like, and then the fact that I had touched something, and I had touched like little Sairah in that way, and it was like, wow, she knows now. She knows now that was never going to happen. And it's just, I'm like, right now, it's just, it was beautiful. That's the best word I have to describe it. It was absolutely beautiful. And so again, I don't think that would have happened had I not been in a session with someone else in there.
Yeah.
That dynamic brought something out. And I don't know, like, before we end, okay, so I journaled about that experience, of course, right? And I don't know, like, if we're ending or not, but
Please, yeah.
I wanted, so the other woman that was in the room with me, she was really like going through some stuff. And I felt so much care for her in that session. And she was such a beautiful person. And I don't mean like just physically, but like when I met her, when she came into the clinic, like I could just, like, she was like light, And then when we went and sat down, we were sharing about how we felt scared, and we were sharing about what we've been going through, and she started sharing some of her, basically, the dark things that she's dealing with, and I was just remember thinking like, wow, but she has so much, like, she has this like beautiful energy that I just want to see shine, And so after we came back to the room, she was sharing, and she was struggling, and she started crying, and kind of like hard. And I looked at the therapist, and I was like, because I wanted to go give her a hug so badly. And I looked at the therapist, and I was like, can I give her a hug? And she was like, I don't know, And I was like, I'm going to ask her. So I asked her, and she's like, no, it's okay. She's like, if I do, I might not be able to let go. And then I said, I would love that. And then she said yes. And so I like hobbled over because I'm so kind of, and I hugged her. And when I hugged her, it just felt like I was hugging myself. And I don't mean my separate self. It felt like she and I were the same. And like giving a hug to her was like it was just, we were the same. We weren't any different. We weren't a different separate beings. We were just the same. And I thought about her afterwards when I was journaling, and I want to say something, and because I would love to be able to say this to her, but obviously I can't. And so can I read something? So I'll read it and change the names, but I think she would, if she ever heard this, I think she would know.
Yeah.
So let me find it. I'll change the name. I'm going to start here. It's not too long. Okay.
No,
all
please.
right. Okay. There was also a moment after, let's call her Jennifer.
Sure.
I could do Jennifer. Okay. There was also a moment after Jennifer and I came back to the room where Jennifer felt very upset and was crying very hard. I immediately wanted to hold her. I felt her pain so much. I remember having times where I cried so hard and I just wanted to be held. At first, I wasn't sure if I should ask, so I asked, I'm going to change the therapist's name too, just in case, Eleanor first, and Eleanor wasn't sure, so I then asked Jennifer directly if I could hug her or if she wanted a hug. She said no at first, and then said if I said yes, I might not be able to let go. And then I said, I would love that. And then she agreed, and I hobbled over and embraced her so tightly. She cried some more, and I just felt so much care for her. I just wanted to support her. I told her she was amazing and that her energy is so wonderful. And I felt it immediately when she walked into the office. She cried hard and also cried. Holding her felt like holding myself. And I don't mean my separate self. I mean, it felt like she and I were one and the same being. Giving her a hug was like giving myself a hug. I wish as humans we could see our connectedness all the time. I wish all the best for Jennifer. I want her to have the best and to feel her best and to feel joy again. God, please give Jennifer the joy she seeks. Please guide her to heal her pain and live a life where she feels love, peace, and joy for herself and others. Emotional thinking about her. I think about her still from time to time. Like, what if I run into her somewhere? Like, would I say hello? I would say hello. I don't know if she'd remember me. I think she'd remember me. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's sweet to just see you feel touched.
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to pause.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for doing this, Sairah.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's like an honor to just be able to be asked, and to share, and hopefully help others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to the Thank You Life podcast. If you would like to get involved with our mission and help more people in need access ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, please consider becoming a monthly supporter. Donations are the sole means through which we provide financial assistance to our beneficiaries, and we currently have close to 1,000 people in need on our waitlist. This work could not happen without our generous supporters, so if you've been touched by hearing these stories of healing and want to make an impact, please consider visiting our website, thankyoulife.org, and becoming a monthly supporter.